Yes, Mr. Millett.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, good afternoon. Good afternoon, members of the panel. I now call Mr. Nicholas Hurd, please.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Mr. Hurd. You're going to affirm, I think, is that right?
I am, Chair.
Right, so the words should be on the screen. Would you read them out, please? Sorry.
I do solemnly, sincerely and truly declare and affirm that the evidence I shall give shall be the truth, the whole truth and nothing but the truth.
Thank you very much. Please sit down and make yourself comfortable. Right? Yes, Mr. Millett.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, thank you. Mr. Hurd, good afternoon. Can I start by thanking you very much for coming to the inquiry, assisting us with our investigations. We're extremely grateful to you. As with all witnesses before you, can I give you one or two coaching tips, please? First, keep your voice up so that the person who sits to your right can get down everything you say nice and clearly. Secondly, please don't nod or shake your head. You've just nodded. You need to say yes or no. Thank you very much. And we will have breaks in the normal way. I'm hoping to finish you this afternoon. You can help with that. If we will break at 3:15 or so in order to give everybody a breather. If any of my questions are unclear, please say so, and I will happily rephrase the question or put it in a different way. Now, you've made two statements to the inquiry. Everything we're going to look at together will appear on the screen. The first one is at HOM 3046080. Is that your first witness statement to the inquiry?
It is.
Thank you. And can we go, please, to page 21, where there's a signature? Is that your signature?
It is.
The date. Thank you. Can we please go to HOM 0005072? Is that your second or supplementary witness statement to the inquiry?
It is.
Thank you. And if we go, please, to page 9, you'll see a signature above the date of the 2nd of April 2020. Is that your signature?
It is.
And have you read each of these statements recently?
Yes.
Now, apart from one correction, which I think you have acknowledged through your solicitors, which we'll come to, can we confirm that the contents are true?
Apart from that material correction, yes.
Yes. Now, I'm going to look at three areas with you. First, and briefly, your background and role at the time of the fire in June 2017. Secondly, the role of the Home Office more broadly. And thirdly, your own involvement in the response in the first 7 days. And can I then turn to your political background? I'm right to think that you are a member of the Conservative Party, yes?
I am.
And previously the Member of Parliament for Ruislip, Northwood and Pinner, yes?
That's right.
And in relation to your ministerial career, I think you were Parliamentary Secretary, Minister for Civil Society between May 2010 and July 2014. Is that
That's
right?
correct.
And Parliamentary Under-Secretary of State at the Department for International Development between 2015 and 2016.
That's correct.
And Minister of State for Climate Change and Industry at the BEIS, the Department for Business, Energy and Industrial Strategy, between July 2016 and June 2017.
That's
yes?
correct.
Yes, thank you. Now, at the time of the Grenfell Tower fire, I think you had just been appointed Minister of State for Policing and the Fire Service.
That's correct.
And you had been in post, I think, for something like 2 days before the fire.
I think I was appointed on the Monday evening.
Right, so a day and a half, well, 2 days. Now, you, the ministerial role fell, I think, within the ambit of the Home Office's responsibility. Is that right?
That's correct.
Yes. And on the 26th of June 2017, I think you were appointed Minister for the Victims of the Grenfell Tower fire. Is that right?
That's correct.
Yes. And whose decision do you know it was it to create that role?
I can't be sure. I've always assumed it came from number 10.
And what did your role and responsibilities as Minister for the Victims of the Grenfell Tower fire involve?
I think they were threefold. The first was to support the victims unit in trying to give direct assistance where we could to victims, and I know the word victims is sensitive, but I will use it because that was the name of the unit. The second was to try and act as some sort of bridge between the community and central government at a time when it was clearly needed, because the context was one of zero trust and engagement. And I think there was a third longer-term dimension, which was a recognition that the road to recovery was going to be long, and the experience from precedents such as Hillsborough suggested that there might be value in having a minister in the system that would effectively act as some sort of advocate for the community within the system, because life and politics and the media, always a risk that they might move on, and that the critical issues that the community still required might lose some sense of focus inside government. I think there was a risk around that, and so those were the three dimensions of the role as I understood it.
And that ministerial role, am I right, sat within the Department for Communities and Local Government? The
That's right.
Right. So although you were, did that overlap with your Home Office role?
Yes.
Right. Now, is it right that you held that role, the Minister for the Victims of the Grenfell Tower fire, until the 2019 general election?
Yes, when I stood down.
When you stood down, did anybody take that ministership up, a ministerial post up, on from you?
No, the arrangement with the Prime Minister was that I would continue to perform a role on a voluntary basis as an independent advisor to him, supported by Elizabeth Sanderson.
Right. Now, I think it's right, isn't it, that on the 26th of March 2020, you were appointed the Prime Minister's independent advisor on Grenfell. Is that right?
Could you repeat the date?
March 2020?
That sounds about right.
Are you still in that position?
Yes.
So does that involve advising the Prime Minister and ministers and public bodies on Grenfell-related issues?
Yes.
And you occupy that role today, do you?
Yes.
What type of Grenfell-related issues would you or will you be addressing?
A very live one in recent months has been the process of decision-making and engagement on the highly sensitive issue of the future of the tower.
Right. Would your role involve examining and advising on the effect of the report and the recommendations of this panel?
My memory is that one of the first things that we did in the new role was to encourage new processes inside government and mechanisms of accountability to make it clearer to the community what progress was being made against the recommendations of your first report, Chair.
And that falls even today within your remit, does it?
There's no official remit. I think the role that Elizabeth Sanderson and I play is to stay engaged with the community, pick up problems, raise them with government, and where there are issues and difficulties and sensitivities, try and make sure that the government fully understands the community's position.
Right. But does that involve, or might it involve, examining and advising on the effect of the report and the recommendations of this panel?
So again, one of the feedback we got from the community in the early days was we don't know what the government is doing in relation to the recommendations of the first report. In my experience, not untypically, actually there was a huge amount going on, but the government was absolutely lousy in communicating it. So, and there wasn't a system inside the government to really drive accountability for it, including the London Fire Brigade. So our recommendation, which was accepted, there would be a ministerial group to drive that forward, and within that process was developed to deliver a dashboard that the community could access, which would allow them to get to the information that they wanted, specifically on the progress made against the recommendations made by this inquiry. So that would be one example of something where we'd heard some feedback from the community, took it into government, and through our advice to the Prime Minister and Number 10, tried to engineer something that we thought was helpful.
Right. I mean, is it right that your role, as described just now, it will examine the effect of the report and the recommendations of the panel, based, as it might be, in part on the evidence you're giving today?
As I said, the remit is very broad. Where we feel the Prime Minister needs advice, we will give it. Normally, I would say in practice, we are heavily led and influenced by what we hear from our relationship and our engagement with the community.
Have you, or to your own knowledge, the Prime Minister, considered the risk and extent of any conflicts inherent in your accepting that role or continuing to occupy that role, the independent advisor to the Prime Minister, at the same time as being a witness?
I don't remember any material conversation around that. The system, if I can use that shorthand, was well aware that I was a core participant. No issues were raised in that respect.
Was any consideration given, to your knowledge, within central government by you or anybody else, to how it could be that you could, at one and the same time, be a factual witness to the inquiry, but at the same time be the Prime Minister's independent advisor in respect of it?
Well, I think with the current Prime Minister, I think the basis of the ongoing relationship was rooted in a desire to see some continuity, because there was a recognition that Secretary of State had come and gone, ministers had come and gone, and that there was value in having some people helping to advise who'd been involved in the process since the immediate aftermath of the terrible disaster. I think that was the primary driver of the current arrangement. As I say, I don't recall any conversations about potential conflicts of interest, and there was, as far as I understand it, awareness that that I might be called here as a witness at some point in the process.
Now, let's turn to your knowledge of the CCA, the Civil Contingencies Act 2004. Can I take it that you heard of that piece of legislation?
I have.
Yes. And at the time of the fire, June 2017, were you aware of the regulations promulgated under that act?
No.
You weren't? Were you aware of the statutory guidance, emergency preparedness?
No.
And I think we can take it that you were not aware, therefore, of the non-statutory guidance, emergency response and recovery?
No.
Or what's been called CONOPS, which has the rather longer title of Responding to Emergencies, the UK Central Government Response Concept of Operations?
No.
No. Had you ever read any of that material?
No, there was no reason for me to do so.
During your ministerial career, have you ever, or had you ever, received any training on civil resilience?
None.
I want to ask you about your time as Minister for Policing and the Fire Service at the Home Office. But before I do, can I just ask you, is it the case that since January 2016, the Home Office was responsible for fire funding and policy framework in which the fire and rescue authorities operated?
I believe that's the date. That certainly was one of my responsibilities as a new minister.
Yes. Now, turning to June 2017, was it your understanding at the time that the Home Office was the lead government department, or LGD, at least in respect of the immediate response?
It was made clear to me.
By whom?
I can't recall exactly, but my expectation would be David Lamberti, from whom I think you've received evidence.
Yes, David Lamberti.
Lamberti, forgive the mispronunciation.
Yes, I think he was one of the Home Office. He was a Home Office official.
He was one of my senior officials at the Home Office.
Yes, and we'll come to see his name when we see the list of attendees
Exactly.
at the 1600 14th of June meeting, perhaps. But can you help us? When did the Home Office relinquish the role of lead government department in respect of the Grenfell Tower response or recovery?
I'm not entirely sure there was a moment, or certainly I wasn't part of the moment. My sense is that during the course of, if I can shorthand, Thursday, there was a sort of a growing recognition that CLG at the time was effectively becoming the lead ministry in terms of the evolution into the recovery phase.
Right, but was it your understanding that the CLG had some responsibility as lead government department for some part of the response?
My understanding was always that, particularly in relation to the performance of the local government level 1 responder, I would naturally expect that the department with overall responsibility for local authorities would in effect take the lead in terms of the relationship and decision makers in that specific context. For the blue lights, my expectation, of course, would be that the Home Office would lead on that.
Right, and what was your understanding generally of the role of a lead government department in the response, the immediate response to an incident such as this?
My basic understanding was that the principal role was of leading the coordination of the kind of support of the national government to the response, in line with the processes that the legislation envisaged.
Right. Did you have a clear understanding of the responsibilities of a government department?
I wouldn't describe it as very clear, Mr. Millett. As you said at the top, I'd been in post for a day. Yes.
Did you understand, and I'm quoting from CONOPS, Chapter 2, 2.8, but let me put it to you without going to the document. Did you understand that the lead government department usually takes overall responsibility for assessing the situation, ensuring that its ministers and other relevant ministers are briefed, handling media and parliamentary interest, and providing coordinated policy and other support as necessary to local responders.
Yes, I think that was broadly what was explained to me, and I was aware that the Home Office had led in the production of the SITREPs, and the fact that I was asked to chair the first meeting, I think, was evidence of clarity around the role of the Home Office in that specific immediate context.
Now, you say it was explained to me. Was that by David Lamberti or other officials?
It wasn't explained in great depth. As we'll come on to see, the circumstances of that first day meant that there wasn't a lot of time for detailed explanation of the mechanics and detailed roles and responsibilities. I was asked to chair a meeting and was pitched pretty quickly into that.
Yes, well, let's turn to that. That's the 14th of June 1600
Correct.
meeting.
Yeah.
Now, it was called a Cross-Whitehall Ministerial meeting. That was a meeting, am I right, convened by the CCS, the Civil Contingencies Secretariat, sitting within the Cabinet Office.
That's my understanding.
And who was the person in that who asked you to chair the meeting?
The person I think I first met and who briefed me was Catherine Hammond. The decision about the meeting was communicated to me, I think, at some point in my visit to the Tower around the middle of the day.
Right. And in general, can you help us?
And that was relayed to me through the private office. I didn't speak to anyone directly.
Right. Let's go to CAB 50118, please. This is, if we can go to the bottom of the page 1, we can see it's an email from Alistair Whitehead on the 14th of June 2017 at 10:04, and he's sending an email to the Civil Contingency Secretariat. You see that?
I do.
And if you turn to the top of page 2, Alistair Whitehead says, "Thanks. I've discussed with Stuart, and the Prime Minister has asked for a cross-Whitehall coordination meeting this afternoon. Given Home Secretary availability, I suggest we do this at Minister of State level, so chaired by Minister Policing and Fire, with ministers from Health, Transport, Housing, London, etc., attending with the Mayor of London and operational commanders. We'll need to cover, among other things," and then there are 4 bullet points, and the third of which you'll see, affected persons, immediate and medium-term rehousing, potential financial support, if appropriate. Now, the Home Secretary at the time, I think, was Amber Rudd. Is that right?
That's correct.
Clearly, there was an availability problem. What was that? Do you know?
I'm not aware of it.
Right. Was there anything unusual about you personally being asked to chair this meeting, as opposed to her, given that she was Secretary of State?
I wouldn't have known at the time because I wasn't aware of precedent. I'd never been in that situation before. I'll be honest and say I felt it was strange at the time, but when you're given that instruction, you take it.
You were given the instruction. You called it an instruction. Who instructed you? I mean, you say...
As I said before, I received a message, I think, if my memory is correct, either on my way down to the Tower or back from it, saying, "There's a meeting in Whitehall, you're being asked to chair it, and we need to get back."
I mean, I asked the question in view of the document on the screen. Was it your understanding at the time that the instruction, or perhaps I should say suggestion, was that had come from number 10? You can see it comes from Alistair.
I don't think I was clearly aware of that.
Right. Now, can you help with whether the chairing of that meeting by you, as opposed to the Home Secretary, made any difference to the official status of the meeting in your understanding at the time?
Could you clarify what you mean by official status? Because I'm aware there's...
Yes.
You were trying to tease out of Catherine Hammond some of the definitions around COBRA.
Well,
I'm here to be helpful, so perhaps direct me to what you're particularly interested in.
yes, absolutely. Second line of the email, at the top of the page. "Given Home Secretary availability, I suggest we do this at Minister of State level." Now, was the lack of availability by the Home Secretary a reason why this was done at a different Minister of State level? In other words, a more junior Minister of State level.
I honestly can't answer that question. This is the first time I've seen that email. I was just simply told there's a meeting and you've been asked to chair it.
Was it your understanding at the time that the meeting, being at Minister of State level, had a different status from the same meeting had it been chaired by the Home Secretary?
I think I was aware that is a different type of meeting, and I subsequently went on to participate in the meetings chaired by the Prime Minister, and that was clearly a different level of meeting. So yes,
Right, but just focusing on the very first part of that answer, when you say that is a different type of meeting, are you telling us that had Amber Rudd been available for the meeting and chaired it, it would have had a different status, a more exalted status?
With respect to Amber Rudd, I'm not sure. My personal, if I'm allowed to express a personal view, my personal view is that those first two meetings should have been chaired and populated at a more senior level, and I'm happy to give my reasons why. Part of those reasons why I think are about signalling, and I can expand on that if you want. I do, however, perhaps register some sympathy with the position that Catherine Hammond was trying to articulate with you, that I'm not entirely sure that would have resulted in a different meeting.
Right, then let's turn to the question of Cobra. Can we go please to Melanie Dawes' witness statement for this part of the inquiry? This is at CLG 3030653, page 36, paragraph 119. And we can see there, she says, in the second line, second sentence, when the Prime Minister chaired Cobra on the Friday, this was very effective. It sent greater focus through the system and had a positive impact on the wider government response. And then she says this: had the initial Cobra meeting on the day of the fire been chaired at cabinet level or by the Prime Minister, it might have provided an additional layer of questioning and challenge about the local response to that being provided by MHCLG and the Home Office. Now, first, was it your understanding on the day that initial meeting was a Cobra meeting, as she seems to suggest there?
No, it was called something else.
Well, we'll see the minute and the other documents around it, but I think it was a cross-ministerial meeting. But was it your understanding? I think you've said no, but to repeat the question, is this right? Your understanding was that this was not a Cobra meeting?
That was my understanding, yeah.
And where did that understanding come from?
Perhaps not rooted in a deep understanding of, the Cobra system, but my understanding of the Cobra of a Cobra meeting is that it's peopled by Secretaries of State and often the Prime Minister in the chair. That may have been my uninformed view, but that was my definition of what a Cobra meeting is: full fat.
Right. Okay. What was your understanding at the time of the circumstances in which a Cobra meeting, full fat as you describe it, would have been necessary or appropriate?
Again, I come back to the point that at that moment on that day, I didn't have any profound personal experience of this to be making judgments. But I refer you to Catherine Hammond's evidence that a full fat Cobra, if you like, is called where it's very, very clear that the national government has a major role to play, and decisions are required by senior ministers. And I think you heard from her that wasn't necessarily the judgment on the first day.
We'll work out in due course.
Of course, sorry.
Did and didn't hear from her. But I want your understanding. Was it your understanding at the time that whatever it was, and we are on the 14th of June when the meeting is called, whatever it was, the Grenfell Tower fire at that point was not the kind of emergency which justified a full-fat Cobra meeting?
No, what I was told was that there was a cross-Whitehall ministerial meeting that, as the Minister for Police and Fire Service, two of the blue lights most directly involved in the response phase, I had been asked to chair the meeting. It wasn't until I got to the meeting, had the briefing, that I had a full understanding of the purpose meeting and went straight into it.
By the time of the meeting, at 4 o'clock on that day, were you surprised in your own mind that a Cobra meeting, properly so called, as you understood it to have been, had not been convened?
I think I've already expressed my personal view that it would have been appropriate to call a meeting at a more senior level from the start.
Now, looking at what Melanie Dawes says there on the screen, where she says that if the meetings had been Cobra, or chaired by the Prime Minister, they might have provided an additional layer of questioning and challenge about the local response. Do you agree with that?
No, I agree with the first part of her statement. As I said, I think that meeting should have been at the most senior level from the start, but that is largely because of the sheer weight of the moment, and we are talking about a situation in which the country had woken up to one of the worst disasters in our memory. We all remember how we felt that day. I just felt that response was not proportionate to the anxiety and trauma in the community and the country, and that people expected to see a more senior level of leadership from the start. That remains my private view. However, and I'm sorry if this is nuanced, I do think the fundamental problem in those two meetings from the point of view of central government was the lack of ground truth and the lack of reliable, good information about what was actually happening on the ground, which was completely unacceptable. And therefore my concern is that even if attendance had been at a more senior level, the brief would have been the same. The information to the meeting would have been the same. And that's why I caution against Melanie's extrapolation that somehow that would have resulted in a different level of challenge. I think the basic problem was the lack of ground truth in those meetings.
Now, just in that last answer, just picking out the thread of it, you say you felt that the response was not proportionate to the anxiety and trauma in the community and the country, and that people expected to see a more senior level of leadership from the start. Was that your view at the time on the day, or is that your view as a result of later events?
Well, thank you for allowing me to clarify that. I think I've already said I was surprised on the day, but when you're asked to do things you do it. So it is a judgment that has formed over time, but I do register again my caveat to that judgment. I don't think people should extrapolate that necessarily as a result of that upgrading of the meeting to a more senior level, that necessarily the experience of the bereaved survivors and residents would have changed materially in that first day.
Now, in paragraph 10 of your first statement, and I don't think we need to go to them, you set out the objectives for the meeting in the Chair's brief, which I think you were provided with by the Cabinet Office.
Correct.
Let's go to that. It's at HOM 000046083. The panel have seen it a number of times with earlier witnesses. Paragraph 1. You are chairing a ministerial meeting at 1600 on the Grenfell Tower fire. The objectives for the meeting are to ensure a shared understanding of the latest situation and outlook, determine any national support that is needed for the immediate response, and to discuss emerging key policy issues. Who prepared this document? Do you know?
I don't believe I ever asked. I think my assumption it was produced by CCS with inputs from other people.
Right, so not from the Home Office officials directly, or is that wrong?
I can't be sure. I was aware that the Home Office had played a role in line with their responsibility in assembling the sit reps and the information into that meeting. In terms of who actually produced this Chair's briefing, I'm not sure I ever asked.
Now, in both of your witness statements, you've referred to the fact, as you say, that Nicholas Holgate dialed into that meeting. I think you would wish to correct that.
No, that was a mistake.
Can you explain how that mistake arose?
Some muddle in my mind in terms of perhaps conflation of meetings. I know that I wasn't alone in that muddle, but I apologise for that muddle. I think, if I'm honest, it probably also reflects an assumption that he would have been there.
Right. So can we take it that you had not read Catherine Hammond's witness statement before you provided your evidence, or hadn't seen
it? No, I hadn't read her witness statements at the time in 2019 when I produced mine.
No, and there may be a chronological reason for that. But just to be very clear, I think in the light of the answer you've just given, we have to correct, do we, paragraph 9 of your first statement and paragraph 5 of your second statement, where you refer to the fact that Nicholas Holgate was on the call or had dialed into the meeting.
Yes, and I apologise again if I've misled the inquiry in any way.
Now, Nicholas Holgate was chief executive of Royal Borough of Kensington and Chelsea, wasn't he?
Correct.
And do you accept that his attendance at this meeting, given that RBKC was the local authority Category 1 responder, was extremely important?
Yes.
And did you expect him to attend?
Yes, I believe so.
And therefore, his absence, is this right, from the meeting or from dialing into the meeting by teleconference would have been an obvious omission, an obvious gap.
There's always a danger of looking at these things through the lens of hindsight. Again, I'd asked the inquiry to understand the circumstances. I'd just come from the tower. I'd walked into the Cabinet Office building into a briefing. I'm engaged with the need to chair a highly pressured and important meeting. I'm going straight into a briefing, and I'm being talked through the brief. There's a time pressure. I don't think there was a lot of time for debate around attendees, and I imagine I received some assurances that the information the meeting required from the local authority was going to be supplied in different ways. You'll also see, Mr. Minute, from the chairman's brief that the questions that you might reasonably expect to be directed at the council, I'm encouraged to direct them to the minister at the community's local government.
So what was the source, as far as you can recall, of the information about what was happening on the ground and what RBKC was doing, if not Nicholas Holgate?
My understanding was that the information was going to be provided through the Department of Communities Local Government, which is why the chair directed me to ask those questions at Marcus Jones, I think was the minister at the time. And we also, as you know, had the Lord Mayor, I believe, on the phone in that meeting as well.
Well, yes. Now let's look then, in light of that, at the documents. Can we go to the meeting minutes, please? These are it. And I want to show you two versions of this and see if you can assist. Can we have up first, please, CAB 402714. I'm going to have, at the same time, please, to save time, a second or different version of the minutes at CAB 30133811. And I'd like, well, first of all, we can see the first page. And they look reasonably similar. But I want to direct your attention, please, on the left-hand side to, under the key issues section, letter B, with the title Immediate Shelter and Medium-Term Rehousing. Can you see that?
I can.
Yes. And that says, the local council were presently identifying temporary accommodation for those residents of Grenfell Tower. Longer-term rehousing would also be the responsibility of the council. The council were not currently asking for additional support. Now, if you look at the right-hand side, this is a different version of the minutes for the same meeting. And under the same heading, under B, Immediate Shelter and Medium-Term Rehousing, it says this: the Minister for Local Government stated that the local council were presently identifying a temporary accommodation for those residents of Grenfell Tower. Longer-term rehousing would also be the responsibility of the council. The Mayor of London pressed for further reassurance and requested that contact was made with the local council to ensure that affected individuals are not left without accommodation. Now, first, are you able to help us understand why there are two versions of this minute with different texts under that heading?
I can't. As I think the inquiry are aware, these minutes were not circulated, and the first time I've seen them is in preparing for this session.
Well, that answers my next question. Then, doing the best you can with your recollection, can you assist us with whether what we see on the right-hand side of the screen, which is longer and more detailed, was what was said?
I can't be sure. Where I'm guided to is the actions from the meeting, which explicitly require the department to liaise with the council in terms of support for housing and accommodation. So that, my understanding of that, there would be a discussion in the meeting. There may have been the position on the left stated, which the council were not currently asking for additional support, and there may well have been a debate that resulted in that action. The level to which the Mayor of London participated in the debate, I can't quite remember.
No, I mean, do you recall, first of all, the Minister for Local Government, I think it was Marcus Jones, wasn't it?
That's my recollection.
Yes. Does that help you with who was providing the update in respect of the local council?
I think with respect, I'd already answered that. It was the department and he was the minister. and he was the one I was directed to ask the questions to in the chairman's brief.
Yes, and therefore, I'm sorry to
No.
press, therefore, is it your recollection that it was the Minister for Local Government, Marcus Jones, who said the local council are presently identifying temporary accommodation?
I can't be sure because I don't have a very accurate recollection of the flow of the conversation, but the minute states that position was stated, and my extrapolation of this and the actions is that there was a debate around that point and an action for the department to liaise with the council, and that may or may not have reflected a level of uncertainty and lack of confidence in the statement that they didn't need support.
Do you recall the mayor or the mayor's representative there pressing for the further reassurances identified in the second part of that paragraph on the right?
I can't recollect it clearly, but that's not to say it didn't happen.
And looking at the left-hand side, in the last sentence, it says the council were not currently asking for additional support. Do you recall that being said?
I can't remember it being said explicitly, but if it's minuted this explicitly, then I think it's reasonable to assume that it was stated as such.
Yeah. Yes. Now, just picking up on the chair's brief you referred to, and you were right to say that you were directed to ask Marcus Jones the question. Let's look at that. That's at HOM 30468083, page 2, paragraph 5D. It's at the top of page 2. That's HOM 30468083. Yeah, there it is. And if you look at 5D, ask DCLG, Marcus Jones MP, what other support has been put in place to assist those affected, in particular whether sufficient rest centres have been established and if support being provided to victims' families. Did you ask that question, do you think?
I can't recall explicitly asking it, but I do note that in the minutes of the meeting, if they're accurately reported, it makes clear that the chair gave every department the opportunity to raise problems. And what I can see clearly is that no problem was raised in that respect, or otherwise it would have been recorded in the minutes, and I would have hoped some actions would have flowed from it. So I'm sorry not to be more clear on that, but that's the best that my memory can assist with at the moment.
What does well, we can see if we look back at it, but take this from me because it's gone from the screen, but there's no record in either version of the minutes of any discussion of that nature.
No, and I accept that, where what I do see is that section of the conversation in the meeting threw up an action in relation to liaison with the council about provision of accommodation, which suggests that there was a debate around the position that had been stated by the department and a requirement of the department to liaise more closely with the council to see whether they could help with something that was clearly an urgent problem.
There was no discussion about rest centres or their
I think if there had been a discussion on the rest centres, it would likely to have been recorded. You will know that in the CRIP or the SITREP there are some basic facts about the establishment of the rest centres. It may be that the department recorded that. In the absence of anyone, and of course this is unforgivable in hindsight, but in the absence of anyone raising a problem, the conversation moves on. And I know that's very difficult for people to understand. Now we know the reality that was being endured by families at that time, but no problem was raised. I believe that no problem was raised in that meeting as it should have been.
And allied to that, let's go back then to the version of the minutes, the slightly longer version, CAB 30013811. If we can go to the top of page 2, please, we can see a section headed Support for Those Affected and Families. And it says, there was discussion around offering trauma counselling to firefighters and ambulance workers involved in the incident. The Minister of State for Health said that NHS England provided bereavement and trauma counselling services and that these could be made available to those who needed it. There's no record there of any discussion about actual support for the families affected, the bereaved, or potentially bereaved. Is there?
No, and I think there is a problem with this minute, if I might explain, because I have some personal responsibility for this particular focus on trauma counselling for firefighters. So there was a discussion around it. I'm as clear as I can be. It did not take place within the context of a conversation around support for those affected and families. Why would it? And I'm happy to explain why prominence was given to that issue if it's of interest to the inquiry.
Well, it might be, but first, I mean, factual question number one: was there a discussion about this kind of counselling being offered to the families at this meeting?
Well, if I can just explain why emphasis was given on counselling to the firefighters, I can explain that because I have personal responsibility for it. So
yes.
I had come to this meeting straight from a visit to the tower. As you might expect, I'd been very affected by the horror of that spectacle. I had met Danny Cotton, the fire commissioner. I had asked her whether she had, this is all set out in my witness statement, and she had made one ask, and that was this specific ask for support for her firefighters. And so I had come from that meeting with her at the tower into the meeting, and I had kind of not wanted to lose sight of that point, and therefore I registered my memory, which may be faulty, which is I registered at the top of the meeting, and there's a logical place to do that, where the first section talks about the needs of the blue lights, and I believe that I would have registered that at the top of the meeting. The fact that in the action list it is registered as the first action, I think bears that out, because the action list follows the flow of the conversation. So I completely understand, Mr. Millett, why it would seem very strange that the meeting should give emphasis to blue light counselling in this context, however important that issue is. But I think the minutes played the right notes, but in the wrong order.
Right. So, but are you saying that there was a different discussion at a different part of the meeting about offering counselling to the bereaved and the families?
I think the basic point I would want to try and emphasise here, that as it says at the top, this was a meeting designed to flush out problems. And so there may not have been a discussion about it. It would have been incumbent on the NHS to brief the meeting and to bring to the table any problems or any requests for additional support. If they didn't, it wouldn't have been registered. And I think that's what happened.
Was there any discussion about what support was to be put in place for those affected, other than housing, as we've seen?
Not that I can directly recall, but again, the meeting was a problem-flushing meeting, and if people didn't recognise or didn't know there were problems at that time, they didn't bring it to the meeting, and therefore the meeting focused on the wide range of problems that we did know about. And as you can see from the chairman's brief, there are about 18 different lines of questioning to different departments, each of those covering highly sensitive and difficult issues. And I was very conscious that one of my main challenges as the chair was to get across all those issues and make sure that nothing was left out. And I feel I did that. But again, I make my central point. That was a meeting to flush out problems. If problems weren't flushed out, there wasn't a debate or discussion.
Yeah. And let's go back to the brief then, in light of that. That's at HOM 3046083. And if we turn to page 2, paragraph 6, you could see there that under paragraph 6, under requests for additional support, it says, ask DCLG, Marcus Jones MP, if there have been any requests for mutual aid from the Strategic Coordination Group. Ask if any offers of additional support have been made by neighbouring boroughs. Was there any discussion on those topics?
Not that I can remember specifically. I have noted that in the CRIP that by the time of this meeting, it's recorded there was an offer of assistance from Hammersmith and Fulham. So participants who'd read the CRIP would have been aware of that.
Right.
But I don't recall any debate, and of course the absence of Nicholas Holgate or anyone from the council would have rather undermined the opportunity to have any debate about that. Can
you explain why there wasn't a debate about those matters? requests for additional.
I can't explain why there wasn't any debate. I think part of the explanation may lie in the absence of the council, because obviously, the question that people would want to ask is, why have you not taken up this offer of support? And only he or his colleagues could have answered that.
Yes. Now let's go then to what happened next after the meeting. Can we go please to HOM 30/46089? Now this is a very long email collection, I think is the right word. We can go to page 14 within it. And at page 14, we can see an official SITREP number 4, 14th of June 2017, received at 17:29. You see that?
Yes.
Yes. It's exhibit number 7 to your first witness statement.
Yes.
And it says, please find below SITREP 4 for the ongoing fire-related incident at Grenfell Tower in Latimer Road, London. Please direct any queries to the HO Fire Duty Officer at, and then there's an email address. And if we go, please, to Media and Communications, which I think we need on page 15. Sorry, page 16, apologies. No, 15 is correct. Page 15, Media and Communications. You see that? You can see that there's a question from the press about the cross-ministerial meeting earlier that day. I do apologise.
Mr. Millard, I can't see it.
No, it's 16.
Yeah.
It's 16. There's something wrong with my screen, I'm afraid.
Yes.
16, Media and Communications. There's significant coverage on Sky News and BBC News with video coverage of the fire submitted from members of the public. For earlier media coverage, please refer to previous SITREPs. Nick Hurd took questions from the press around 1700 hours. You see that?
I do.
And it's reported that you say, in answer to the question, tell us what was discussed. In the third square bullet point, it says, it was a meeting of senior ministers and senior officials from across the systems, and I leave it feeling reassured that the resources are in place and the capacity is in place to support people through this immediate emergency response. What was it that reassured you that resources were in place and that there was capacity in place to support people?
Well, in part because that's what the meeting was told. In large part because that was the meeting was told. Again, it's a meeting to flush out problems, and I come back to my central point. That meeting was not adequately informed by the ground truth of what was happening in the area, and to my eyes now, in hindsight, clear failures of intelligence in terms of bringing the right information to that meeting, and therefore, unacceptable as it looks today, because it reads terribly complacently. I could only report what the feeling of that meeting was, which was at that point in time on day one, there was the message was, we can cope, we have the resources, we have the capacity.
But the we there is RBKC, isn't it?
To some degree, and most importantly, but this is a cross-Whitehall meeting where every department, and the minute is very clear that I left space for every department to signal any problems, and the actions show where the debate focus, which was immediately recognition of the challenge that the council were going to have in relation to temporary accommodation, and an action that the department needed to engage urgently with them, notwithstanding their statement that they didn't need any support. So there clearly was some active debate around that, as you will see from the rest of the interview. The media were very quick onto the national issue, which was the fact that people were going to bed that night, alarmed about the safety of the buildings they were in, and so that as you would expect, did occupy some space of the meeting in terms of a ministerial response to that.
Yes, indeed, and you cover that next in the Q&A.
Yes.
Now, by this point, were you aware that there were others, not from Grenfell Tower, but from the surrounding buildings, particularly the walkways, who had been evacuated and were going to be needing emergency temporary accommodation?
My honest answer to that is I don't think that meeting was sufficiently aware of that point, and I'm not sure if my memory of the crypt sheets or the sit reps, which is what the kind of information feed at that meeting is, I don't think they capture that truth adequately either, is my honest recollection.
Now, you mentioned earlier in your evidence today that you had come to the 4 o'clock meeting from, I think I could call it this, the incident ground, from the building. Yes?
Correct.
And you'd visited that, I think, in your capacity as Minister for Policing and the Fire Service at about 1 o'clock that day, 1300 hours.
Around that time, yeah.
Yes. And just to be clear, is it right that you didn't, at that stage, visit any of the surrounding areas, including rest centres?
No, I wish I had, and I can explain why not.
Why not?
The most practical issue is that I had been informed, my recollection is I'd been informed about the meeting on the way down or at some point during the visit, and the advice was, quite rightly, I needed to get back to prepare for what was a critical meeting. In practical terms, that's the most direct reason. In hindsight, I wish I'd have gone down earlier and seen more. There were frustrating delays in getting authorization to make a visit. So, in effect, my visit was unauthorized.
Now, you went down there. Presumably you went to the cordon?
Correct.
Did you go through the cordon?
Yes.
How close did you get to the tower?
My recollection is I stood at the foot of the tower with the Deputy Fire Commissioner, Steve Apter, and the Fire Commissioner. There were police officers there and there were ambulance services there. The fire was still active. There was a fire engine still being deployed, and there were firefighters resting on the grass from memory.
Now, before you went through the cordon, did you have a chance to observe what was happening in the streets?
My recollection was that it was very difficult to get to the site, and my hazy recollection is that it was a confused landscape in terms of manoeuvring around, and as you might expect, an atmosphere that it's very hard to describe.
Can you describe it?
Well, I think part of the, not adequately, if I'm honest, Mr. Miller. I was in the cordon. It took a bit of time to get there, but I was in the cordon where, obviously, by definition, there was a sort of insulated feeling, but the horror of the building was very powerful.
Now, at any part of your visit, did you, first of all, were you accompanied by anybody from RBKC?
No.
Did that strike you as strange?
No, because I come back to the genesis of the visit, which was, rightly or wrongly, I'd been sitting frustrated in the Home Office, wanting to go down. I was a newly appointed Police and Fire Service Minister. I felt I was in the wrong place sitting in the Home Office. I wanted to go. As my witness statement says, I'd had a conversation earlier that morning with Deputy Commissioner Steve Apter. He'd made it clear that I was welcome to go down there, and I was keen to do so. I'd suffered frustrations in terms of getting authorization to do so. So my lens was very much as Minister for Police Fire Service, who didn't at that stage recognise that I was about to be pitched into a sort of wider responsibility in terms of chairing that meeting. In hindsight, of course, I wish it would have been different, because I might have gone into that meeting with some ground truth that meeting didn't have.
Right. Did you feel that although the Home Office being responsible for fire meant that it was lead government department, that you were, in respect of the response to this civil emergency, that you were adequately briefed and trained in that aspect of your portfolio?
I don't see how I could have been, given that this was day 2.
And finally on this, did you observe at any time during that visit anybody from RBKC or, so far as you might have been able to tell, KCTMO?
No, to be honest, though, I'm not sure I would have expected to. I don't know what the rules around the cordon were, but that was a space in which the blue lights were working.
Now, let's turn to the 15th of June. Can we go, please, to HOM 30469090? And if we could pick up the second email, please, at the foot of the page. It's an email from your private secretary, I think, to the office of Sajid Javid, FAO James, access to cash and sleeping materials. And it's timed at 8:45, and the email confirms that both officers have spoken and there were concerns raised by you. And if you look at the second and third bullet points, the second bullet point is right at the foot of page 1. The Minister has been told that there is an urgent issue with access to cash for former residents of Grenfell Tower. He's also been told via Margot James MP, BEIS Minister, that the post office, there's a local one just around the corner from the tower, have offered to facilitate access to money for residents. He would be really grateful if your teams were able to facilitate a link between the post office and the local council so that they can make people aware. And then the third bullet point, there have been a couple of concerns raised with him about the quality of the sleeping materials that were available for people last night, and asked if there was anything HMG could do to help the council upgrade. Now, just looking at that, Mr. Hurd, would it be right to say that, based on this email, concerns about residents getting access to cash and about the quality of sleeping materials at the rest centre were raised with you either late on the 14th of June or early morning on the Thursday, the 15th?
Yes.
Yes. And can you recall which it was? Was it late on the 14th, or was this the first? Was it just before you sent this message?
No, I can't be sure, but my instinct that these would have been concerns raised towards the end of the day previously, which were recorded and sort of dispatched into the system first thing in the morning. But I may be wrong on that.
Now let's then turn to your first contact with RBKC. Can we go please to the first email on page 1 in this same email stream? This is the continuation of that discussion. And this is an email back from Sajid Javid at 9:44 that morning, which confirms that both officers had indeed met since the earlier email at 8:45 that I've just shown you. James, it was good to meet you earlier. That's how it starts. And then it confirms in the third paragraph, the Minister is keen that 1, someone from HMG speaks to the CEO of the PO, and 2, link is made to the council and that residents are able to access money as soon as possible, unless there are already alternative arrangements in place. And we can see in the second paragraph references made to the leader of RBKC Council, and specifically a suggestion that Nicholas Holgate be the right person for the post office to connect with. You see that?
I do.
Yes. In the second paragraph there. Now, the leader of the council was Nicholas Paget Brown, wasn't it?
He was.
Yeah. Did you speak to him?
I did at some point during these proceedings, as I set out in my witness statement. I do not recall a conversation with him about this specific subject.
Do you think you spoke to the leader before 9:44, or perhaps before 8:45 that morning?
I don't recall explicitly having a conversation with him about this urgent issue about access to cash. It may well be that it was processed by other people.
Right, it's a timing point, really. Can we?
I understand. Yeah.
Can we narrow down the timing of your call to Nicholas Paget Brown to at some point before 9:44 on that morning? Looking at the second paragraph.
I can see why you might lead to that. I am, and I'm frustrated by this. I'm struggling to recall exactly when I had that call with Nicholas Paget Brown, because I may have confused myself with my error about the attendance of Mr. Holgate in the first meeting. My best estimate at this moment is that I had the conversation with Mr. Paget Brown at some point on the Thursday morning. my best recollection. It may well have been in line with your line of questioning.
Right. Okay. Now, in your second statement, paragraph 7, and we don't need to go to it, you refer to speaking first with Nicholas Holgate, the chief executive of RBKC, your first conversation with him. Can you remember when you first spoke to Nicholas Holgate?
So, correct me if I'm wrong, but are you assuming that I had these conversations? Because I'm not necessarily assuming that from reading this email.
No, let's go to the statement then.
Yeah.
I'm not using the email to base my question.
Yeah.
I'm using the statement.
The first time I heard Mr. Holgate's voice was in the meeting of the 15th of June, in the cross-ministerial meeting.
You're clear about that, are you?
I'm as clear as I can be.
Let's see if we can be clearer even more. If we go please to HOM 3050072, your second statement, paragraph 7. You say in the middle of the paragraph, my first interaction with the leadership of RBKC had been with Nicholas Holgate, the chief executive of RBKC. Now, that suggests that your first conversation with Nicholas Holgate was before your first conversation with Nicholas Paget Brown, yes?
Yes, but I think this plays into my misunderstanding and my muddle around which meetings Mr. Holgate attended. So my first recollection was that the call with Mr. Paget Brown followed that meeting.
I see.
I'm now in doubt about the sequence.
I understand. So I follow. I understand that. So
thank you.
In fact, it's possible, looking at the email I showed you, that you spoke to Nicholas Paget Brown first, and at some point before 9:44 on the morning of the 15th, but didn't speak to the chief executive, Nicholas Holgate, until the meeting that afternoon.
That's possible.
Yes, it's possible. What's your recollection so far as you have?
Probable.
Right. Now, when you did speak to Nicholas Holgate, can you remember what you spoke to him about?
Mr. Holgate or Mr. Paget Brown?
Mr. Holgate.
So my recollection is my first conversation with Mr. Holgate was as chair of the interministerial meeting, and he was an attending by phone. So I never saw him. I don't believe I had a prior conversation with him.
Right. Now, so we essentially we have to read paragraph 7 of your second statement in the light of what you told us.
Exactly. Yeah.
I follow. Now, sticking with the 15th of June, on that day, and indeed around that time, I think it's right, isn't it, that Parliament wasn't sitting?
Because of the election, yes.
Because of the election. But nonetheless, it's right that an extraordinary meeting was convened on the 15th of June, yes?
Correct.
Yes. Do you know who called that meeting?
No, I mean I think it's what's described as the usual channels. So it would have been an agreement somehow between the parties at the leader of house level or at the whips level. I'm guessing. I've never asked, but I assume that is how these occasions are agreed.
Right. And what was the purpose of the meeting, so far as you understood it?
Oh, I mean I'm very clear on that. As I alluded to earlier, this was one of the worst national disasters to have affected this country in peacetime. It would be absolutely right for our democracy to debate and discuss it. Obviously the primary issue was the local condition and issues that arise around support for the community affected, but it was a national issue as well, in which MPs were having to deal with inquiries from their constituents who are either very concerned about the event and the response to the event, or very concerned about their own personal safety and the tower blocks they're in. So it's a long answer, but it was entirely appropriate that our democracy should not ignore the moment.
Now, did you attend a briefing session before that meeting?
I believe so.
And that, I think, was with Alok Sharma, MP, who was then the Minister of State for Housing and Planning?
Yes, and possibly other attendees as well.
I think Andrea led some as well, yes.
That would make some sense.
Well, she was Leader of the House.
She was.
And that meeting started, according to the record, at 13:30. That
sounds right.
Your recollection. And I think is this right? You led that meeting together with Alok Sharma?
Yes, which was very unusual. It was an exceptional meeting in every sense. And I can explain why.
Could you?
Because if Parliament had been sitting normally, the meeting would have been chaired effectively by the Speaker, and the ministers responsible would have been held to account at the dispatch box. And this was a wholly unusual meeting where, in effect, I was chairing the meeting as well as answering questions to the government alongside Alex Sharma. It was extraordinary in the sense it was held in a different room. It was a highly emotionally charged meeting, so it was exceptional in every circumstance.
Now, you say in your statement that you fielded a large number of questions from MPs who, amongst other things, were concerned about the residents. Was there a discussion on that topic?
Yes, and in large part it resulted in effectively the guarantee that Alex Sharma made about offering housing within the local area, which I think, in my recollection, flowed in part from the debate in that meeting, which obviously had a large number of London MPs in it, as well as representatives from all over the country.
Now, that's just so discussion about housing. Was there any discussion about any other aspect of the impact of the fire on residents or, more broadly, families, bereaved or potential bereaved, and surrounding residents?
Not that I can recall directly. That doesn't mean it didn't happen. One of the exceptional features of this meeting is that there is no recording of it, as I understand it. There's no filming of it, as I understand it, which is frustrating. However, to be fair to my parliamentary colleagues, I record that there was a great deal of concern expressed in that meeting about the welfare of if I may say, the living victims of the fire.
Now, according to Alex Sharma's witness statement, we don't need to go to it, but it's at CLG 1000973, page 7, paragraph 23. The meeting finished at 15:15 p.m. Would that accord with your recollection?
Yes.
So it was quite a long meeting.
Yes.
And you yourself, I think, that very morning had raised concerns about the support being provided to those affected, as we've seen from the
Yes.
Yes. Did your concerns in your mind on the morning of that day occupy any time of the meeting?
I remember speaking to the need for the state to effectively put its arms round the community, and I remember talking about the need to avoid plodding bureaucracy in that process, and I think that was the sort of general sense of the meeting as well. So, and obviously that meeting then flowed into the second meeting, where, as you can see at the top of that meeting, from the minutes of the meeting, that I'd made it very clear that I wanted that meeting to focus on individuals.
Yes, and we're going to come to that in just a moment. Before we do, can I just ask you, please, to look at your first statement, page 9, and go, please, to paragraph 27. In the middle of the paragraph, you pick up the meeting with Alex Sharma, and then just after halfway down, you say, I gave a statement, and the meeting was also used as an opportunity for parliamentarians to ask questions of the government. It was held in Westminster Hall, and we fielded a large number of questions from MPs who, amongst other things, were concerned about the residents being rehoused and the safety of other buildings across the country. The special meeting reflected the deep shock felt up and down the country. Now, the only two topics you mentioned specifically there are rehousing and the safety of other buildings across the country. Was there any discussion, to the best of your recollection, on any other topic?
I'm sure there was, because I think members of Parliament wanted to register their deep shock at how something like this could happen in Britain. I'm sure that there was a discussion or position taking on why this had happened. I'm sure that a range of other issues were debated and discussed. I say debated, but it was more of series of members of Parliament giving statements and positions, I may have just chosen those two issues because they fed into the meeting that I went on to chair.
Well, let's go to that then. That meeting started, I think, at 15:30. This is the second cross-Whitehall ministerial meeting.
Yes, Alec and I went straight from Parliament to that meeting.
Right. And as you told us before, Nicholas Holgate did dial into that meeting.
He did.
Yes. And then there's the chair's brief again. Let's look at that. HOM 3046131, which is your Exhibit 4 to your first statement. And as you say, at the top of the briefing note, in the third line, in particular, you will want to probe on progress on the provision of support to victims and the emergency services and the provision of fire safety advice to the public. So that had become, was this right, something at the top of your agenda, progress on the provision of support to victims and the emergency services?
Yes.
Yes. Now, if we go, please, to CAB 402720, let's pick up the minutes of the meeting. We can see who was there from the first page. No, we can, yes. And you can see there, you're in the chair, list of names, bottom of the screen, Nicholas Holgate dialing in. Top of page 2, please. The chair opened by emphasising the need for rigorous understanding of the situation affecting individuals to inform the response. Was that as a result of the concerns raised with you, as well as the direction in the brief?
I think it reflects a growing understanding that there was a problem, which arguably should have been, almost certainly should have been there the day before. So I just wanted to make it very clear that I wanted to focus that meeting on support for individuals and understanding what was needed and what was going on.
And what was the precise problem that you were increasingly understanding?
Oh, I think there was a growing sense that we had not been sufficiently informed about the ground truth. The inquiry will be very well aware that in parallel there's a kind of very sustained and intensive sort of media story building, which my recollection, I think this is borne out by the Crips on the first day, was very much around how could this have happened? But then I think quite rightly soon evolved into exploring some of the failings on the ground in support for the community. So my recollection may be hazy on that, but I sensed that this was part of a overdue shift on the part of central government to really focus on actually what was happening on the ground to support bereaved survivors and residents.
Yes. Mr. Chairman, I've got a number of questions still on this minute, but I think I probably won't finish before 3:20. So,
would you rather break at this point, or do you want to finish the questions?
let me get to exactly 3:20, and I may have come to.
The time doesn't have to be exactly 20 past, so we can allow you a certain amount of indulgence. I don't think the witness will mind if we got a few more minutes.
Well, let's.
Nor do I need a break if you need the time.
Well, there are others who would welcome.
Let's take this in stages. I never one to refuse an indulgence from the chairman. Right. Let's go, please, to page 3 then. Item 2A. Key issues: immediate shelter and medium-term rehousing. And it says, those affected were being placed into hotels for immediate shelter, with 77 from Grenfell Tower and 25 people from the surrounding area in hotels. A large number of people are assumed to have gone to stay with friends and family, though the Westway Centre had capacity for 300 to stay and only 30 were there the previous night. Did you have clarity at that meeting about whether those figures of those housed in emergency accommodation related to individuals or households? What were those numbers?
I can't call exactly, but I think you'll be aware from the action list, from memory, the two first actions from this meeting were related to clear uncertainty and concern about the quality of data and information available. From memory, I haven't got the action points in front of me, but by now we were very concerned about the quality of information and data. We had about some very basic things like how many people were in the tower and how many people actually needed support. And when we come on to Mr. Holgate's testimony, that was at the crux of his lack of credibility.
Right. But this, I think, was something that you'd been aware of from earlier that morning, wasn't it? This problem about numbers and consistency.
Yes, it had definitely grown through the day as a very clear concern that we are on knowledge of how many people were in the tower and how many people needed support was not fit for purpose.
Well, let's just leave that document on the screen, and can we then go at the same time, please, to HOM 30 46089, page 21. This is within the bundle of situational reports, or SITREPs, which you exhibited at NH7. And this one is at 9 a.m. on the 15th of June, as you can see. Yes?
Yes.
At the top of the screen.
Yes.
And it's SITREP 5. And if you go, please, down to page 22, you can see in the fourth bullet from the bottom, that's about 2/3 of the way down your screen, it says, vulnerable people and families have been given accommodation overnight as a priority, including 44 families from the tower and 25 from the surrounding area. There remains a shortfall in accommodation. Now, that's what you were told earlier in the day, at 9 o'clock that day, but come the afternoon, the meeting discusses 77 from Grenfell Tower, as opposed to 44 families. Did you think those figures were inconsistent?
I think that reinforces the point I'm making, which the system I was part of was getting increasingly concerned that we couldn't rely on the numbers being provided, which is why the two actions at the top of the flow from this meeting are focused on data and information. As I'm sure you're aware, that I believe the previous evening my colleague Alex Sharma had spoken to Nicholas Paget-Brown and had got some numbers from him about the gap between what they had and what they felt they needed.
Yes, and you'll have seen, I think, from the earlier situation report that confirmed 200 people had been evacuated, and yet only 25 had spent the night in accommodation. Did that inconsistency concern you?
I think that just merely reinforces my central point. There was too much inconsistency around numbers, which is why that meeting focused very much on trying to put in place processes to improve our understanding of the numbers.
Yes, thank you. We may come back to this
of course.
Minute in due course, but Mr. Chairman, is that a convenient moment for the afternoon break?
I think it is, yes, thank you. Well, as you know, Mr. Hurd, we have a break during the afternoon for the benefit of all sorts of people. So we're going to take it now. We'll resume, please, at 20 to 4. And while you're out of the room, I have to ask you, please, not to discuss your evidence with anyone. All right?
Okay,
thank you very much. Would you go to the usher, please? Thank you, Mr. Millett. 20 to 4 then, please. Would you ask Mr. Hurd to come back in, please? Right, Mr. Hurd, ready to carry on? Yes. Thank you.
Yes,
Mr. Millett.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, thank you. Mr. Hurd, can I ask you please to go back to the document we were on, which is a minute of the meeting, sorry, the situation, the SITREP, I apologise, on the right-hand part of the screen, and go just look at the penultimate bullet point where it says rest centres, some heated flare-ups between individuals, especially regarding media intrusion. The Westway Rest Centre stayed open overnight for those who had not been provided with alternative accommodation. Further humanitarian assistance centres will open today. Now, first, were any flare-ups discussed during the meeting, do you think?
Not that I can recall.
Was it clear to you how many humanitarian centres would be opened?
I can't recall.
Was it clear to you who was responsible for opening them up?
My assumption would be the local authority.
Right. Did you leave this meeting feeling reassured that the resources and capacity were in place to support those affected by the fire?
The overall and most powerful recollection from this meeting was the complete collapse in the credibility of Nicholas Holgate when under questioning. That is the overriding impression of this meeting.
Right. I think that might answer the next question, but let's pinpoint it exactly in your statement, your first statement. Can we go to that, please, at page 5, paragraph 17? You say about 3/4 of the way down the block of text that you began to lose faith in RBKC's ability to deal with the situation. At what point, on the 15th, I think it is, of June, did you begin to lose faith in RBKC?
Well, I think this meeting was a defining meeting, and I think you've heard that from other sources. It was because of his failure to attend the previous day. This was the first time, effectively, the council was kind of open to questions. And as we discussed before the break, there was a growing concern about data, the reliability of data and numbers, and he really wasn't able to answer some questions that anyone might reasonably expect him to answer. And you've seen the reactions to the meeting. I think it was instrumental in the dropping of the penny across the system.
Right. Can you give us a concrete example of a question which he wasn't able to answer, which you'd been expecting him to be able to answer?
So my recollection that the focus of the discussion was around housing need. You'll be aware that the Housing Minister Alex Sharma had come to that meeting from Parliament, where he had made effectively a guarantee about rehousing in the local area. You'll know that he'd been pressing the council leader, I think, the night before for numbers. And it became quite clear from the questioning and the investigation in that meeting that the council weren't on top of the numbers, both in terms of numbers of people in the tower and the broader housing requirement. And I can still see the faces around the room of incredulity.
Right. Can I just ask you, though, the Alex Sharma guarantee you just referred to, was that to rehouse everybody affected by the fire within 3 weeks?
No, that was it was a guarantee to rehouse within the local area those who wanted to be rehoused in the local area. There wasn't a time frame put on it on the Thursday when the procedure got escalated to what I've called full fat cobra. It was effectively the Prime Minister that drove the decision to put a time frame on it.
I follow. Thank you. Now, what did you do as a result of this loss of faith?
Well, I think as you can see from the evidence around the system, it was a defining moment. So it was the moment that the penny dropped with number 10, who were there at the meeting. I think you've seen the evidence from Helen McNamara and other people from the department who were at the meeting. I think you've seen the reaction of Catherine Hammond at CCS. It was the moment when I think the system belatedly recognised that the council were failing and were not on it, and that something needed to change. And I think it's from that moment on that the wheels started to turn.
I see. And do you agree with Catherine Richardson's assessment of Mr. Holgate in that meeting, that he was quite defensive and tried to assure ministers that no additional help was required?
I think he was still on that page, and I think that was, again, where the incredulity and the lack of credibility started to build. We couldn't have had a clearer picture.
And what measures were in place to monitor or oversee that RBKC had the necessary resources from central government effectively to be able to carry out their responsibilities from the start?
I think those are questions best directed at the Department for Communities and Local Government. My short answer were they were inadequate.
Right. And that appeared to you at the time, did it?
Well, by now, this may be part hindsight judgment, I think I, as chair, and the rest of the system were getting very frustrated about the lack of ground truth and the lack of our understanding of what was really happening on the ground, and that suggested a major information failure.
Did you have another conversation with Nicholas Paget-Brown after this meeting?
My recollection, I had only one conversation with Nicholas Paget-Brown because obviously he is a political leader rather than the chief executive, so I wanted to get a different perspective. It turns out the contents of that meeting were exactly the same as the conversation he had with Alex Sharma.
Did you speak to Nicholas Holgate after this meeting, and indeed at any time in the ensuing few days?
No, I don't believe so, because from this meeting the wheels were turning that would eventually lead to regime change.
And now, sticking with paragraph 17, in the last sentence there you say, "Further, I appreciate that given the scale of the disaster, it is likely that RBKC was quite simply overwhelmed." Now, is that a hindsight observation on your part, or was that your impression or observation at the time?
I think it was fast becoming the impression that at the moment, after this meeting, I was taking calls from friends and acquaintances who were involved in the area, and I was introduced to the Alan Everett, who is the vicar at the time at Clement St James's, and he took me through dispassionately, and the picture was emerging very clearly of totally unacceptable coordination and support for the community.
Right. So you, to be clear, given everything that you'd done up to that point, including chairing these two meetings, visiting the site, talking to Nicholas Paget-Brown and at this meeting, that was your impression at the time?
Yes.
I see. Now, did your impression of the situation on the ground and the reports that you were receiving personally accord with the information coming through up to that point, that the council did not need support?
No, I think that's my point. There was a kind of ground truth lag. I think, as is well now documented, Mr. Holgate was trying to maintain a line that the council could cope on its own, and the evidence was beginning to weigh very heavily that they couldn't.
Let's go then to the Friday, the 16th of June. Can we start on that day, please, with CLG 30s18939? Now, this is an email from Catherine Richardson, timed at 8:02 a.m. on that day, Friday, 16th of June, to Helen McNamara at the DCLG. Catherine Richardson was the Deputy Director within the DCLG's Resilience and Emergencies Division, RED, R-E-D. And it also goes to the office of the Principal Private Secretary at the DCLG, as you can see. And she says that she's just taken a call from the Housing Minister's office. If you go to the subject, CLG support to RBKC, and if you look at the first paragraph, it says, "Thanks, Helen. Yes, Joe and I discussed. Ideally, we can encourage Nick H. to ask us for the specific help we're offering, copying Alex P., who should be kept cited on this. I've also just taken a call from the Housing Minister's office. Nick Hurd is continuing to raise concerns about how the response on the ground is working, e.g. getting information to people affected. Some of this is for the police rather than K&C, but we should consider a stronger offer of support. Now, were you continuing to raise concerns that morning about how the response on the ground was working?
Yes, and I think it's recorded through my private offices. As I've just said, I had a series of calls the night before, directly from community people working as volunteers, i.e. sort of non-official calls that were really trying to impress on me how bad things were and the need for the government to get its act together. And that included a conversation with someone I didn't know who was the vicar of St Clement St James's.
Right, so just filling in the blanks for us there. The meeting happens on the afternoon of the 15th, but between the meeting ending and early morning on the 16th, I think you're telling us that you had discussions with people from the community.
Yes.
About what was actually happening on the street.
Yeah. In the meantime, of course, as you've got evidence, wheels were beginning to turn in the system that had belatedly recognised that there was a major problem that required a change in position. I was simply having those calls and those conversations, and as you have evidence, I fed those in on the Friday morning first thing.
Yes, and were those calls coming to you, or were you soliciting them, as it were, finding out?
No, they were all coming into me from people I knew or vaguely knew, or perhaps knew I was involved and found ways of getting hold of me. But someone I can't remember who offered to introduce me to Alan Everett, the vicar of Clement St James, and his. Because obviously they were absolutely at the epicenter of this and had a very clear view on the failings. His very kind of dispassionate account of the failings left a deep impression on me.
Right. Did anybody from the Muslim community, from the Al-Manar Mosque, for example, get in touch with you or try to get in touch with you directly?
I can't remember, but I one of my first visits was there, and I heard directly from them their experience. As well. I can't put an exact date on that visit, but it's in my witness statement.
Now, if you look a little bit lower down the chain, earlier on the morning of the 16th of June, you can see at 07:57, there's an email from. If we go to, I apologise. If we go to page 2, we can see it more clearly. Middle of page 2. There's an email at 7:41 from Lorna Grattan at number 10 to the office of Sajid Javid, copy to Alistair Whitehead, who was the Prime Minister's private secretary. Subject: CLG support to RBKC. Hello, it says. I spoke to Helen Mack yesterday after the cross-government meeting. There are still concerns here about how well organised the response effort is for those in receipt of it on the ground. Would it be helpful for them to have more support from CLG, e.g. a small team of people seconded similar to the Victim Support Unit? Could you let me know what you think? Thanks, Lorna. So would it be right to take from that there were concerns within number 10 about the effectiveness of the response at this stage?
Before this email, I think you've got evidence that immediately after the meeting that I chaired before, Lorna Grattan had a direct conversation with senior officials of the department to express her view in response to what she'd heard from Nicholas Holgate. And I think, as I said, wheels were beginning to turn the night before. This is just a building of the drumbeat.
Right. Now, just to put one more piece of the puzzle in place, could you go please to CLG 408234? If we go to page 1 in this email run, third email down, this is an email from your office, Deborah Morrison, I think, to the office of Sajid Javid, 16th of June. This is at 8:56, so a little bit later than we've been looking at. Copy to Catherine Hammond. Hi, James, Tom. With many thanks, Tom, for your time on the phone. The Minister is receiving direct feedback this morning that the coordination on the ground in terms of, 1, connecting families, and 2, coordinating the volunteer effort is not quite there and is perceived as chaotic. He feels it would be helpful for us collectively to identify who is actually responsible for coordinating both efforts as in a person and what, if any, more support they may need. Now, that direct feedback, was that the feedback you've just been explaining to us? In other words, direct conversations you were personally having with people on the ground?
I believe so. That's my reaction to your question, yes.
Yeah. And what did you do as a result of that feedback?
What I've just described, which is I've fed it into the system, and I think that this is just one of the proof points of that. Yeah.
So this is you essentially feeding it into Sajid Javid's office.
Yes, because by that time, clearly his department was leading.
Yeah, right. Now, following those issues being raised by your office with DCLG, what did your office continue to do better to support the local council with the problems they were facing locally?
You're asking what I did?
What you did, what you and your office did.
We registered this concern. We asked that question. I think that reflects the feedback that you've had from evidence that one of the fundamental frustrations and causes of distress was the inability to identify any leadership or reliable sources of information or any visible coordination of the humanitarian support, if I can use that language, and there'd been a delay in setting up the coordination mechanism for that. So at this point, I am registering concerns and asking questions. You'll be aware that around about this time, or very shortly after, a decision had been quite rightly taken to go to full fat Cobra with the Prime Minister in the chair, as I think a result of the drumbeat I described earlier in terms of growing awareness that there needed to be change.
Then let's move on, an inch on, I think, by a few minutes later into the morning of the 16th of June. CAB 401152, please. This is an email from your office to Catherine Hammond at the Civil Contingency Secretariat at 9:33. If we go, please, to the second email on the page. Can you see that?
I can.
And it comes again from your Private Secretary, Deborah Morrison. And it says, Catherine, thank you so much for your time on the phone earlier this morning. So was this you speaking to her, or was this your Private Secretary speaking to Catherine Hammond?
This is my Private Secretary.
Yes. As we discussed, she says, in advance of the meeting this afternoon, the Minister would be really grateful if the Secretariat could pull together a written summary of what we are doing across the system to, 1, support victims, 2, provide support for emergency services personnel, 3, action taken so far to identify and check similar buildings, 4, action taken so far to rehouse people, and what is our common understanding, DLG RBKC, of the commitment to rehouse people locally, 5, action taken so far to reassure people about their fire safety, and 6, an update on access to cash and how it's working on the ground, stroke any updates from local banks, ? We've touched on all these questions over the last 2 meetings, but the Minister thinks it would be helpful to have a summary that we can work through point by point. He feels it's important that we use this meeting to really stress test the reality on the ground, given the conflicting reporting, and as this is likely to be the handover meeting before we switch into recovery mode. Would that be possible? Now, why did you consider it necessary to convey that detail or those questions to the Cabinet Office, the CCS?
Because I think the assumption, the context here is that we are preparing and expecting for a third in the series of the meetings that I chaired, and I wanted to be sure that that meeting kind of drilled down into the issues that we'd raised and some of the challenges we raised. So I think this is to the Cabinet Office, asking them to prepare something specific for me in the anticipation, as I think you can see from the email at the bottom of the page, that I would be chairing the next meeting. As we now know, the decision was taken that the Prime Minister would quite rightly chair the next meeting.
Now, going back to the bottom of page 1, you can see that I read to you that you are recorded as feeling it important to use the meeting to really stress test the reality on the ground. Why was that necessary? What had led to that need?
Because of the cumulative picture that I've tried to convey to you, that this process of cross-Whitehall coordination was terribly undermined by poor information, lack of ground truth, and data that wasn't keeping up with reality, which made a difficult decision-making environment even harder. So I think this is partly an exercise of a chair wanting to make sure that there was momentum and continuity from the last meeting, and that we really drilled down into what we said we would look at and what felt most important at the time.
And what was the conflicting reporting? You need to go to the top of page 2, I'm afraid. But if we go to the top
I
of
think
page
it.
2, what was that?
Let me please just check the.
Given the conflicting report.
So I think this in part relates to the point that you were trying to tease out of me, which is around the confusion around data and numbers, which was causing real frustration.
So inconsistent reporting from IBKC rather than conflicting reporting from different parts of government. Is that?
I think it's the former, to the best of my recollection.
Now, I think you just made the point, but confirmed for us that you, at that stage, still expected that you would be chairing the further Cross Whitehall meeting that afternoon.
Yes.
Yes. And if we go, please, to CLG 408289, we move further forward into the morning, 16th of June. Page 1, second email in chain, please, towards the bottom of page 1. Here's an email from Alistair Whitehead at 10:50. It's confirming that the Prime Minister had decided to chair the meeting that afternoon herself. And if we go to the top of page 2, please, you can see what she says, or what he says. The Prime Minister has decided that this afternoon's CCS ministerial meeting will now be the first meeting of the Prime Minister-chaired Grenfell Towers Recovery Task Force at 13:30 in 70 Whitehall. CCS will confirm with a calling notice, with SOSs from DCLG, HO, DFE, DWP, MOJ, HMT, DH attending, along with the Policing and Fire Minister, Minister for London, Operational Partners and the Mayor of London, and RB Kensington and Chelsea. The crib should be circulated by 12 noon. And then there's a list of bullet points, which are the topics. And it's clear that those topics, those 6 topics, have been either cut and pasted or very closely copied or mirrored those set out in the topic list that Deborah Morrison had sent at your instruction earlier that morning to Catherine Hammond. Yes.
It looks very similar. This is the first time I've seen this email, so.
Right. Do you know what it was that changed to take this from a ministerial meeting number 3 to a Prime Minister-chaired task force meeting?
I think the Prime Minister's personal visit, if I recall the timing correctly, the day before, will have had a powerful effect upon herself. She was by then, and I'm simply deducing this from the evidence that you've receiving advice that the council was failing, and there were major problems about the support for the community. Should have been advised that it was time to escalate the process, because it was likely that the central government was likely to play a bigger role than perhaps had been imagined at the start.
No, I think you continue to attend the meetings
I do.
which become known as the task force meetings.
I do.
Yes. And just pick this up. At CAB 30's11967, here is an email from Alistair Whitehead. Late on the day of the 16th, at 18:25, to Catherine Hammond, where he says, we're going to have another PM-chaired meeting tomorrow. Sorry, given the seeming chaos on the ground due to RBKC not gripping this. We will then maybe do a call on Sunday, but hopefully not a full physical meeting. Was it still the case on the Saturday, 17th of June, notwithstanding that the Prime Minister was now chairing what was called a task force, that RBKC was still not gripping this, or rather that there was still chaos on the ground due to RBKC not gripping this, as
Yes.
you said? Given that by that stage RBKC had ceded control to John Barradell as London Local Authority Gold by that stage, why was there an expectation that RBKC would grip it or continue to do so?
No, this may be. I can't speak for Alistair in that context. This email is obviously going out around the point of the transition. I don't think it changes the fact that that there was chaos or there was perceived to be chaos on the ground, and the need for a clearer sense of grip, which a PM chair meeting would bring.
Then sticking with the 16th, I think Andrea Leadsom visited RPT, didn't she, Rugby Portobello, where she met a volunteer called Soph McVeigh and Eddie Dufan. Do you remember that?
I wasn't with her. I wasn't with her. I remembered that she visited the area.
And do you recall, well, let me show you a document, IWS 0002250. Here is an email from Soph McVeigh, and you can see that it's timed at 9:22 on the 26th of October, so it's a long time afterwards. But if you go then down to the foot of page 1, you can see another email much earlier in the string on the 22nd of June 2017. And then if you turn to page 2, you can see that this is a response to Andrea Leadsom from Soph McVeigh, and here you see underneath that Soph McVeigh's email to Andrea Leadsom on the 17th of June at 16:50. Thank you for coming to visit RPT yesterday. We were together in a meeting with Eddie, a Grenfell Tower resident, first thing. In the meeting, you gave the impression that your priority would be to get someone in charge, in place as a matter of priority, and act in a coordinating capacity. As it stands, there are a number of local groups, mainly staffed by volunteers, working 24/7 trying to deal with this disaster. There is no central coordinated point of contact for information all residents' needs. The government needs to appoint a minister, department and team in charge immediately to coordinate all the different relief efforts. Most of the people on the ground are volunteers or community-based operations. Most of us do not have disaster experience or training. There's been no lead on this. Very urgently, no one has been visiting the hotels to check the residents. Some are elderly, all are very disorientated, and most do not have English as a first language. For example, just now, an RPT volunteer had to drive a doctor from the Westway to one of the hotels. Grief counsellors and medics need to be at the hotels on a daily basis. Now, I don't see that, we don't see that Andrea Leadsom responded to the email. But my question for you is, did she discuss these topics with you at that point?
Not that I recall.
Would you have expected someone in her office to have raised these matters with you?
I was only aware of a visit. I wasn't aware of this conversation or what the substance of her visit was.
So she raised, is this right, no concerns with you about the need for a single central government point of contact for bereaved survivors and residents?
Not that I recall, but that doesn't mean that she didn't raise it with others.
Now, you've already touched on the creation of the role of Minister for Grenfell Victims. Do you recall whether the need for such a role arose either wholly or in part from the concerns raised by Soph McVeigh and Edward Daffan with Andrea Leadsom on the 16th of June as recorded in this email?
I don't believe so directly, although obviously this very powerful email talks to a lot of the entirely unacceptable reality of experience of people who had every reason to demand better. So I think it's, although I've never seen this email, it's absolutely consistent with the picture that was beginning to form in the government's mind, which is why on the Friday you can see very clear evidence of the central government mobilising in a way that it hadn't done so on the Wednesday.
I mean, did the government give thought to appointing a minister or department and team in charge to coordinate all the different relief efforts at this time or later?
So the two meetings I chaired were designed to coordinate the support of central government to support the response and recovery process as per the blueprint of the Civil Contingencies Act 2004 and the presumption of sovereignty and everything that you've explored. So there was a coordination function up and running from the start, as I've the point I've laboured is I think that process was terribly undermined by the quality of information that went into that system.
You say terribly undermined. I mean, was this an enduring flaw, or had it been? Was there a time when it came to be cured by the fact that John Barradell was now in charge, and pan-London arrangements were in place?
It certainly, and you've got independent advice on that. It improved quickly.
Now let's turn to the 17th of June. It's right, I think, that you and Amber Rudd, the then Home Secretary, visited the Westway Centre that day.
Correct.
Whom did you meet there?
We met a range of people. The meeting that sticks most closely in my mind is a meeting I'd organised with a representative group of volunteers who, as you well know, were by then a very, very important part of the landscape in terms of support for the community. And I felt it was important for Amber Rudd to hear directly from them some of the issues that they faced.
And one of the issues that they faced was the issue of money being distributed to affected families, wasn't it?
Yes, one of a number of issues. Yeah.
A number of issues, also including support for people in hotels and
Yes.
communications. So those problems were persisting, yes?
Yes.
Notwithstanding the appointment and entry into action of John Barradell the day before.
Although, to be fair, he'd only been in the seat for a day, and he was inheriting a chaotic landscape. So, to be fair to him, I think it would be reasonable to expect him to have a little bit more time to impose improvement.
Yes, and I think you observed a number of problems with the response which you wanted to raise with John Barradell. Yes, and we have a letter to that effect.
Yes. A joint letter with Amber Rudd, yeah.
A joint letter with that is HOM. Let's put it up in front of you. HOM 30469091. That's the letter, isn't it?
That's the letter.
Yes, and it goes to John. It goes to Robert and John. John is John Barradell. Who's Robert?
I'm not entirely clear who Robert is.
Right.
I apologise for that.
It is going to David Gawkes, MP's PPS, and it may be him. Now, in that letter, there's a long letter and there's a list of problems in it, but were all those problems persisting at the time of your visit?
I assume so, because they were relayed directly to us on that day.
Mm. Yeah. Yes. Now, if we look, please, at the last paragraph, you can see that the letter was also sent to number 10. If you go to page 2, please. Yes, it goes to Gavin Barwell, Alistair Whitehead,
yes,
and others at number 10. And you say in your first statement that you were subsequently given to understand that the £500 cash payment would be distributed to the affected families on the 18th of June. And then they would get a chit to enable them to receive the £5,000 payment. What was the source of that information?
The source of the information of the problem?
The source of the information of the process to be run by RBKC.
I can't recall, but I think through the CRIPS and the SITREPs there's a reasonable account of how the mechanisms of payment were set up.
Right. And do you remember that the confusion about distribution of money was one which was first grasped on, I think we've seen this from your own email early in the morning of the 15th of June, but was still uncured as at the 17th?
Yes, I may be wrong on this, but the earlier conversation with the Post Office was about making it easier for people to access their cash. This is a conversation in part about the ability of people to access the cash that was promised by the Prime Minister on, I believe, the day before.
Yes. In fact, I think the record shows, and correct me if I'm wrong about this, but that this was still a problem come the 19th of June, the Monday.
I believe so.
Yes. Do you know why? Why was it a problem that endured through the weekend?
I don't think I'm the person best placed to give you a reliable answer on that.
Well, can you give us a clue?
Not one that you can rely on.
All right. Would you accept, though, overall, that the policy governing how payments would be made was still being devised within government as late as the month.
Yes, I mean, I don't think that's completely surprising. The policy, I mean, obviously the Prime Minister wouldn't have announced it if there hadn't been some pre-cooking, as it were, but it wouldn't be completely abnormal for some of the detail to be worked out subsequently, and some things probably not thought through fully that needed to be ironed out. I don't think that in itself would be completely surprising.
Let me show you what Sadiq Khan has said about this. Can I show you his statement, please?
Of course.
This is MOL 50189, page 14, paragraph 60. I'll read it to you. He says, page 14, paragraph 60. One thing from that meeting that stuck out in my mind, and this is the meeting on the Saturday, which you can pick, and you can take this from me, pick that up at paragraph 57.
Yes, I remember. Yeah.
He says, one thing from that meeting that stuck out in my mind was a fairly lengthy discussion that took place about how much financial support should be given to families displaced from their homes, either in the Tower or close by, and whether this should be paid as a lump sum or in instalments. There appeared to be a reluctance by some to give those who needed support this payment in a lump sum. A figure of £500 was discussed to be given to families who had lost everything in the fire as an, quote, instalment, close quotes, rather than a lump sum of £5,000, which I believe was based on relief given to those forced to leave their homes in areas across the country hit by floods. I recall, if we can turn the page, please. I recall I intervened to ask why it was an issue here in the Grenfell community to make one lump sum payment rather than instalments when it hadn't been the case after a flood. I couldn't understand why the residents of Grenfell Tower would be treated any differently, and said so. It was eventually agreed that this would be paid as one lump sum of £5,000. Looking back, I consider this was symptomatic of the prejudice and institutional indifference towards the bereaved survivors and residents we were to see in the months and years that followed. Now, first, did Sadiq Khan, to your knowledge, say or raise the point about difference in treatment between the victims of floods on the one hand, who got a lump sum, and the victims or the residents of Grenfell Tower on the other?
I recall there was a discussion about the right structure. I don't recall it in the terms that Sadiq Khan relates, and I can't, to be honest, recollect him having a direct intervention into that conversation. That, of course, doesn't mean it didn't happen. There was a discussion, for sure.
Right. And were you party to the discussions leading to the eventual agreement that it would be paid as a lump sum of £5,000?
No, because at this point this is being driven, I presume, by DWP and the Treasury, and from memory it was 500 cash and balance in the bank account. I may be wrong on that. There was definitely a discussion around what was the right balance and structure, but I think it was entirely being driven by what's the most sensible and appropriate thing to do, rather than some of the assertions that are made.
Can you enlighten us? What was the reason for the difference in treatment?
To be honest, Mr. I'm not aware. I wasn't involved in the flood, in the flood process, so I'm not aware that there was a difference in treatment, or why, if there was, there should be.
Right. Now, the Mayor's retrospective or hindsight opinion is that it was symptomatic of the prejudice and institutional indifference towards the bereaved survivors and residents that he says we were to see in the months and years that followed. Do you share that view?
No, I don't, but you might expect me to see that. What I do absolutely accept that the response in the immediate after the fire was wholly inadequate, and might have led some people to believe there was institutional indifference. I know there wasn't, but I understand why some people might have felt that.
Can we then turn to HOM 30's 46091? Which is the letter again. And if we go, please, to the foot of the screen, support for people in hotels, it says, it was clear that many of the families were being housed in hotels were not receiving sufficient care and attention. For example, some had been housed on the top floor of buildings. There were complaints of hotels not providing food at times suitable for those fasting, which, given the makeup of the area, was a significant number of people. There was also the feeling that people in hotels were out of sight and out of mind. John, do Kensington and Chelsea Housing have the resource they need to engage these families one-on-one to ensure that they're okay? Do you need any support from HMG? Now, the John is John Barradell there. Did you receive a response to that question?
I didn't personally. I don't know if Amber Rudd got a formal response to this or not.
Looking further down, communications. It was clear that the communications work that had happened to date was not filtering down to the ground. This is not necessarily a surprise when people do not have phones. And then it goes on. As such, the Home Secretary has commissioned her Director of Communications, Simon Wren, to produce a leaflet on behalf of the government, clearly setting out government advice in multiple languages. This will then be distributed to the community. Now, this is the 17th. This is the Saturday. Yes. Why was that not considered sooner? Why were the leaflets not considered sooner?
I can't necessarily answer that. What I am very clear about is that was one of the clearest takeaways from that visit. I remember Amber Rudd being particularly exercised by this, and it's consistent with all the evidence you've received that one of the most common and utterly reasonable complaints was, no one was telling us anything. We simply didn't have the information that we needed at a time when we desperately needed, and that message, Amber and I received loud and clear, and she was determined to take an immediate action on it. The context of that trip, it was we were effectively on a fact-finding visit. It was about trying to build our understanding of what was actually happening on the ground that reflected our lack of confidence in what we'd been told up to that point. So by this point, another department was in the lead, but we wanted to sort of play our part in trying to find out.
Do you know when a leaflet did eventually get produced?
I think it was very quick, within days.
And would you accept that that could have been and should have been done faster?
Yes, like many things.
Let's then go, please, to HOM 30468081. This is your Exhibit 14. It's a letter from the local MP, then Emma Dent Code, to Amber Rudd, the then Home Secretary. And if you can see at paragraph 2 on that page towards the foot of the screen, I should have shown you the date, it's the 17th of June 2017.
Yes.
Paragraph 2, under the heading Immediate Support for Those Affected, there must be officials from all relevant government departments and agencies on site to deal with benefit claims, identity documents, any issues related to immigration status, and all other key administrative and bureaucratic issues. Did officials from the Home Office first arrive at the Westway Centre only on the Sunday, the 18th of June, and not earlier?
I believe it was Sunday. I believe there were 3 departments there on the Sunday, and the Home Office was one of them.
But not before?
I believe not.
And why was that?
I can't be sure. It may well be that as part of our visit, it was clear to us that the government needed more visible representation on the ground, and it may well be that Amber accelerated that as a result of our visit. But I think there's also part of a broader process of central government weighing in more heavily, being more visible, being aware of the need to provide support. In the case of the Home Office, a clear need to help with replacement of documents, for example.
Immigration documents?
Or a manner of documents, but including immigration documents.
Right, and I think it's right that the Home Office set up a 24-hour telephone line to assist with immigration and passport issues.
Yes.
But only 4
days.
And
I think that may have front-run the physical presence, but I may be wrong on that.
Right. But that, I think, was some 4 days after the fire, in the end. It wasn't until the Saturday or the Sunday.
That may well be the case, yeah.
Right. And do you know why it took so long?
Because I think it feeds into the bigger, wider problem, which is central government was too slow.
And I think there was some... Can you help with this? There was some confusion around the automated menu, which was established, which didn't make it clear that there was a specific line for Grenfell-related inquiries. Did you come to know that?
If I did, I don't recall it today.
You can't help with that?
I'm afraid I can't.
You also visited the scene and surrounding areas on a number of occasions after the 14th. I think one was with Alok Sharma on the 19th of June. Is that right?
No, it wasn't a visit. It was a public meeting.
A residence meeting, I think it was, wasn't it?
In truth, I think this is confirmed from other evidence, it was a meeting predominantly, but not exclusively, with the bereaved, as it turns out.
Right. At all events, was it at the Harrow Club?
It was.
Right. And if you go, please, to HOM 46086, you can see a letter dated the 24th of June. Yes, that's it. Which it starts, "Dear all, thank you for inviting us to join the Community Safety Partnership meeting on Monday evening." And the Monday evening was the 16th, I think. Sorry, the 19th. Yes. And then it covers a large number of topics. And we can scroll down. We can see practical support at the Westway Centre, financial support, and then if we scroll to page 2, we can see rehousing for people whose homes were destroyed. And there in the first bullet point is the Prime Minister's commitment to rehouse everybody within 3 weeks. And then to page 3, support for people whose homes are not fit for habitation, immigration, and then public inquiry. Can you help us? Why was that letter only sent some 5 days after the meeting, the first meeting? Well, the meeting on the 19th. Why was it only sent on the 24th of June?
I can't be sure. It would have been a letter that would have to be cleared through the system. Sometimes that can be unacceptably slow. In this context, it clearly was unacceptably slow.
And can we go to the CLG 404304? And this takes us outside the 7-day period, but it's an email of the 29th of June 2017 from Helen McNamara to a number of people in DCLG, including the office of Melanie Dawes. Subject, reflections on today's meetings. And it says, "This afternoon, Suzanne and I accompanied Nick Hurd and Liz Sanderson from number 10 to a series of community meetings at St Clement's Church in North Kensington." And then if you cast your eye down a little bit further, there's a title, General Reflections, and it says, "We are still letting these people down. They do not feel as if government is responsive, and we must fix that. Clearer lines of communication will help, but we have to be much more active and present in person at every level if we want people to believe that the government cares and will keep its promises. They consistently said they wanted things written down. Our housing letter is a very good idea, and we need to think about doing more of that." And then the second bullet point is about the hardest question, why it wasn't possible to be clearer about the numbers who were in the tower. Third bullet, all of the groups were critical about the lack of any visible authority on the ground in the immediate response, and still now. Now, focusing on the first bullet point and the criticism perhaps in the third bullet point, did you share Helen McNamara's views that are reflected in her reflections as a result of the meeting that you had with her that day?
Yes.
And can you explain why it was that even as late as the 29th of June, you were of the view that government was still letting the local community down?
By then, I'd taken on the new role that you asked me out on the start, and as I've said in my witness statement, I'd taken the decision to try and have personal meetings with families or individuals that wanted to see me, and through those meetings, as well as trying to help them with their personal issues, a picture was forming quite clearly about how some of the failings that were still in the system and the way that people, continued to feel let down. I would also say that because of the failure to grip it in the early days, the situation that John Barrett and others inherited was made even more difficult. And as I think others have said, if you don't get a grip on these things early, then it becomes very hard to reassert any sense that the system has got the situation under control. I think the perceptions were set very early and were very difficult to shift. And as I think Helen points out to, there was a huge problem in terms of trust.
And can we look at your first witness statement, please, at page 7, paragraph 22? You say in the second sentence, top of the page, it was not evident to me that a blueprint existed for managing the aftermath of the Grenfell Tower disaster. What do you mean by that? What point are you making?
I'm in part making a perception that I was walking into a system that was in shock because it had not anticipated an event like this in terms of some of the worst case planning. So I think that was reflected in some of the early processes. I think with the benefit of hindsight, that statement also takes on board the reality that the system struggled to adapt to the reality of the Grenfell disaster and a situation in which one of the first level responders clearly couldn't cope but wouldn't admit it.
So you're making a point about...
There was it's a bit of a hindsight point, but the system struggled to cope with what I think was a first-time situation where one of the first-line responders was not asking for help in a system that was built on the premise that if people needed help, they asked for it.
Thank you very much. Mr. Hurd, those are the prepared questions I've got for you, although there may be one or two others I have inadvertently missed. I'm going to ask the chairman now to take the normal break. It's a little bit later than I would have liked him to do that, but I'm going to do that.
Yes, well, I think you may have been here when I explained to the last witness why we have to have a break at this point. So I won't go all through that again, but we do need to have a break. I should think 10 minutes is enough, isn't it, Mr. Millett? But if I said 20 to 5, Russell.
Yes, 20 to 5 would be.
Yeah. And if you need more time, you can always tell me. We'll break until 20 to 5, and then we'll see if there are any more questions at that point. All right?
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Would you go to the usher, please? Well, there are, Mr. Millett. If you find you need more time, just let us know. Right?
Yes, thank you, Mr.
Thank you
Chairman.
very much. Would you ask Mr. Hurd to come back in, please? Right, Mr. Hurd. Well, we'll see if there are any more questions. Yes, Mr. Phillips.
Yes, Mr. Chairman. Just one question, Mr. Hurd, and it's this. Looking back on it, looking back on the visits you had at the time, your interactions at the time, and reflecting on it now, is there anything that you would have done differently in the role you occupied at the time?
Well, I'm ashamed, of the failure of the system I was part of to provide, fellow citizens with the most basic support and comfort that they had every reason to feel totally entitled to in arguably their darkest hour. I thought hard about this. I genuinely feel that I did the best I could with the information and experience available to me, but if the inquiry feels that best wasn't good enough, I, like others, will be held to account for it. I have very briefly two reflections. I was part of a system that failed to be alive early enough to the possibility/probability that the Kensington and Chelsea Council would not be able to cope. And this isn't a judgment around preparation or even competence. I think it should have been evident to us earlier that the scale and complexity of the seismic impact of this disaster was always going to be too much for one council to cope with. Add to that the very clear impression that was forming quickly on the first day that the council was going to struggle to have the moral authority to lead. I think that we collectively should have been quicker to put in place risk monitoring that gave us more direct observation of what was happening on the ground, that in turn might have empowered us to be more effective in our challenge of the council. And I think of my chairing of the first meeting and wishing that we'd had better information about the reality of life in the rest centres. I think of my first conversation with Nick Paget Ground and how I would have played that differently if I'd known what I know now. So I regret that. I have a second reflection, which I don't think has perhaps come through in other evidence. Part of what upsets me most about the evidence that you've been presented with from bereaved survivors and residents in that period was the way people were made to feel. And you've had language out of this, impersonal, second-class citizens, the specific instances of totally unacceptable. And I was concerned then, and am still concerned now, about the degree to which those involved in the human contact in the emergency response are trauma-informed. I know I wasn't sufficiently trauma, but we are talking about a community in deep trauma, and those helping them or trying to help them need to be, in my view, better informed about what that actually means. And I don't feel that's been picked up elsewhere, but it's very clear to me. Those would be my two reflections, and then I have just one closing comment with your permission, Chair. So you have, for reasons that I completely understand, decided to draw a line on the seventh day, and I totally respect and understand that. But you will be as aware as anyone that the road to recovery and what some people call a new normal is still work in progress, as I think some statements have put it, and continue to be very difficult for many people. One observation I make, having been involved in this process, is where any progress has been made, it has been where the state has realised that it needed to think and act differently. The critical distinction between doing things with people rather than doing things to people. And where we have had any progress is where the NHS or even the council under new leadership have recognised that. To make that work, you need people to work with. And I know that I would be supported by many people who've worked in the public services over these years to want to acknowledge that, individuals, families, committees, representative groups who took in many ways a very brave decision to engage with us despite everything that was going on in their lives, despite every reason not to trust the state, took a decision that they wanted to work with us to try and help us make better decisions on behalf of their representatives or their neighbours. And I know many people would just want to register our thanks and gratitude for that. It's an extraordinary community that deserved a lot better. Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, Mr. Hurd, it only remains for me to thank you very much for coming here and assisting us with our investigations. We're extremely grateful to you. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you.
And Mr. Hurd, I must add the thanks of my own thanks, but also the thanks of my fellow members of the panel to you for coming to give your evidence. I think you've been able to give us a very unusual, and might even say unique perspective on some of the aspects that we're examining in this module. And it's been very helpful to us. And I think I can say with some confidence that we've learned a lot. So thank you very much indeed for giving up the time to come and give evidence to us.
Thank you, Chair. I know how important your process of delivering truth and accountability is to the community, and I wish you every strength in that. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And now, of course, you're free to go.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Millett.
Yes.
Now that must be it for the day.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. And again, thank you to everybody, including our transcriber, for sitting a little bit later to accommodate
Yes, of course.
me and the witness.
And tomorrow we'll have another witness.
Yes, Ms. McManus, who will be examined by Ms. Malhotra of Council.
Thank you. And so we break there and we resume at 10 o'clock tomorrow morning, please.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.